Welcome back to TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest is the Honorable Arielle Roth. Her and I share the dislike of reading of her resumes at the introduction. So she is administrator at NTIA, has a great and extensive background on Capitol Hill, and a number of formative years at the FCC. So with that, I thought we'd delve right into the start of some dialogue and make this conversation more lively. They want to hear from you on the important things happening at the agency.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. What an honor it is to be here, and thank you, Randy, for those incredibly kind remarks. 20 years is such an exciting accomplishment. Free State Foundation has just been a steadfast promoter of free markets, individual liberty, free expression. I always learned so much whenever I attended any of Free State's events, and I'm just so honored to be here. So kudos to Free State, and may you continue to go from strength to strength. And great to be here with my friend, colleague, and former boss, who's been an incredible mentor to me as well.
Very kind. But Randy, hopefully for the next 20 years, we'll have that champagne, what you promised earlier. Can we start, Administrator? Let's start with BEAD. Top of everyone's mind. We've moved basically from the approval process and the consideration of applications to actual deployment. How is that going, and what have you seen so far?
So we're actually at a really exciting stage in BEAD with states finally moving into the deployment stage that we've waited so long for. Recently, I was in Nebraska with Governor Pillen, way out in the western part of the state, in a rural part of the state called Ogallala, where one of the country's first BEAD deployments occurred. We visited the site of the tower where a wireless access point was deployed to bring gigabit service to the surrounding community. I met with one of the homeowners there who was getting gigabit service delivered to her farm, and she was just absolutely thrilled. And it occurred just within months of Nebraska's plan getting approved. And I think what's so significant about this, and we're seeing it in other parts of the country as well, like Louisiana, which is also seeing deployment occurring, is that in this part of Nebraska, the provider was delivering gigabit fixed wireless service using unlicensed spectrum. And that was technology that was categorically precluded from participating under the previous administration's rules. I think it really just goes to show the importance of the benefit of the bargain reforms in not only delivering, cost-effective, high-quality service to Americans around the country, but also doing it in a really expeditious manner. And so we're excited to see continued deployment. The states are in the process of negotiating contracts with providers, getting them signed, and finally seeing deployment happening, and looking forward to much similar good news in the months ahead.
Do you have a runway for how long you think deployment, or the vast majority, are going to be done in this time period, or are we at the early stages and a lot of it's going to be back at the end of the backload?
So there's, statutorily, there's a 4-year deployment timeline. We would love to see projects deployed as quickly as possible. And so certainly that's something that we're closely monitoring. I think, again, as I said, having all of the above technology solution is really critical to that expeditious deployment. We're monitoring conditions on the ground. Our NTIA's role has shifted from, approving state plans. Now we've got 54 approved, 52 have signed their award conditions, and the states are signing their contracts with providers. So we're really closely monitoring conditions on the ground, with respect to challenges that providers are going to face. Building broadband is not easy, and we expect to see that issues to come up with labor, with supply, with permitting, as you all know, and we're
Polls,
doing our part to ensure that we're tracking that, we're monitoring the health of the fiber supply chain. We have commitments from large providers that they intend to deliver supply to BEAD providers in a timely fashion to keep us on track. And on permitting, we are closely monitoring the conditions on the ground. We have conditions in our agreements with the states to streamline processing, have single points of contact, maintain permitting roundtables. If there are challenges, elevate them to NTIA. And that's very important. And we also, just count on the providers to have an open dialogue with us. Ultimately, we want to see this program successful, and we're very optimistic about that.
As you're signing, as states are working through, or the broadband offices are working through signing the contracts, is there a chance that states may be reasserting and going to rewrite some of the BEAD obligations that you would kind of tamper down, some policy decisions you had made? Can states, resurrect, I guess is the word I'm looking for, resurrect some of those things? Can NTIA stop that from happening?
So look, BEAD is a federally administered program, but really the states are the eligible entities. It's this unique way that Congress, established the program. We have rules that the states and the companies just can't contract out of. There's no exceptions. They apply to everyone. And we have made clear that we expect them to be upheld. We recently issued a Know Your Rights document, given to ensure that the providers were, knew what their rights are in their contractual negotiations. One of the things that, as you know, we've been very focused on is preventing defaults in the program. And some of the sources, the most significant sources of defaults or risks of default are uncertain regulatory conditions and regulatory experiments in states that drive away investment in BEAD areas. And one of those is rate regulation. We've been very clear that in their contracts with providers, states must include language that to protect providers from such regulatory experiments, harmful regulatory experiments that undermine the success of BEAD projects. And we've also been very clear that states must abide by our permitting obligations to streamline processing and minimize permitting costs and expedite permitting. Those are just some of the ways that we've really tried to ensure that investment is protected and that projects are built in a timely and successful fashion. I think that there's always going to be some gray areas where NTIA's rules are silent, and the states may have their own laws on the books, and they're as I said, they're negotiating with the states on sub-grantee agreements, and so that can sometimes raise challenges between the providers and the states. That's something that we're monitoring closely. We continue to be a resource in the event that there are questions from both the states and the providers. We continue to issue FAQs. But I think that so far we're seeing some really good results. Lots of states signing sub-grantee agreements with providers. And God willing, we'll see some significant progress in the months ahead.
Well, best wishes on BEAD. Lots of hard work and families that need connectivity, so God bless. Let's switch topics a little bit, talk maybe to Spectrum. There's a lot of gray-haired people out there that lived through Congress passing, after many years, new auction authority. and let me get this right here, it's the Working Families Tax Cut Act. And NTIA had obligations under that to identify bands, a substantial amount of spectrum under the law. What should stakeholders look into milestones for NTIA identifying? They're not only did they have 3 identified bands in the law, but also identifying the full plate of spectrum that needs to be put forth.
Yes, so I've said repeatedly, we need an all of the above approach to spectrum, more spectrum for everyone. We want to lead in 6G, and making sure that 6G can get deployed means making more commercial spectrum access available, which is at the heart of the spectrum provisions in the Working Families Tax Cut Act, as well as opportunities for more access to satellite spectrum, commercial spaces, an area where the U.S. leads, and we are very committed to ensuring that the right spectral conditions are in place to ensure that America continues to innovate and lead in this area. And we also are a leader when it comes to unlicensed innovation. That's something that China has been pushed back on by identifying the 6 gigahertz band for mobile commercial use. And that's a band that we continue to monitor to maintain our leadership in that area and convince the world to go in the American direction when it comes to unlicensed spectrum. But if I could maybe just give an update on the bands that we're looking at, lots of positive news. As you said, there's a number of bands that we're looking at to get to our statutory requirement of identifying 500 megahertz of federal spectrum to be reallocated for commercial license use. This was thanks to the leadership of President Trump and the Trump administration in identifying 6G leadership as a huge priority for this administration. And that's why we have the biggest pipeline in history. So the work is on us to get it done in a timely manner, and we hope to meet or hopefully exceed our deadlines and targets. The first band that I think is probably the most far ahead is the 7 gigahertz band. The president actually put us on a deadline to identify spectrum in that band by December. We're fully on track to do that, and it's a huge part of our strategy to counter China's 6 gigahertz focused approach to 6G. It's a huge opportunity, potential to identify up to 275 megahertz of valuable spectrum for commercial use, which would exceed not only our deadline of identifying 200 megahertz in 2 years, but hopefully also the amount of spectrum we have to identify in that period. We're working on the 2.7 gigahertz band. I know that you recently had a blog post on the importance of making that the band available for commercial use, something that we fully agree with. We recently announced that the OMB, FCC, and NTIA Tech Panel had signed off on spectrum relocation funds for that band so that the incumbent agencies could, under NTIA's leadership, could perform the requisite engineering studies to relocate systems and make the spectrum available for commercial use. Now we're in a period of a 60-day statutorily required notification of Congress that's going to end on June 30th. So we're hopeful that the SRF, what's called the Spectrum Relocation Funds, become available so we can complete that engineering work and get the spectrum identified as soon as possible and hopefully auctioned during this administration. The 4 gigahertz band is another band that we're really excited about, a band with many different agencies that use that spectrum, but it's very valuable given its propagation characteristics. It's a little further behind 2.7. SRF funding isn't available quite yet, but we're on track to get it with the 9 incumbents in the band having submitted their blueprints to NTIA for pipeline plans. And then finally, there's spectrum in the L-band, our down payment that we've already identified, 5 megahertz in 1675 to 1680 megahertz. And we're also looking at the 15 megahertz above that, including potentially for direct-to-cell usage. As I said earlier, this is an area that we lead in commercial space. Direct-to-cell is definitely a very exciting area where the U.S. leads, and we're really excited to getting that band across the finish line as well.
NTIA-led revitalization. What role will the spectrum.gov have in providing a picture to the public? Is that the value? What will that bring to us?
Yeah. So as some of you know, NTIA recently unveiled a website, spectrum.gov. When I was a staffer on Capitol Hill, I always found that the process of studying and reallocating federal spectrum to be kind of opaque. And so one of the things we've done is we've tried to make that process more transparent. And so we have a dashboard of the steps needed to get to identification of spectrum, and we're updating our progress with respect to the bands in the pipeline. So that's one feature of the website. We're also sharing work that we're doing in preparation for important standards setting meetings, including the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference, and also just generally giving information to the public about our work on spectrum, whether it's with respect to the studies or whether it's respect to launch spectrum, access to spectrum for satellite, and the just making the process more transparent. And we welcome the public's feedback on the website, how we can make it more helpful and useful, and continue to provide information on our activities, because I've always believed that having a more transparent and accountable agency really delivers it delivers better outcomes in terms of policy.
Can you talk a little bit about the Spectrum Relocation Fund? A little clunky in its operations. Have you had any difficulty with its regime and what it should look like?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. So, I alluded to this before, but with respect to bands that are getting reallocated from federal to non-federal use, there's a process for the developing engineering studies to facilitate that reallocation, and that's done primarily through the Spectrum Relocation Fund. That provides funding to incumbent agencies to study and the NTIA to study the relocation of systems, so that critical federal systems can find a home. It's kind of like a puzzle that needs to be solved on the front end before the FCC can auction the spectrum. And it's also really important for the success of an auction, because if you don't perform the requisite engineering work, then there's uncertainty with respect to the amount of spectrum that can be auctioned and under what parameters. So the funding from the Spectrum Relocation Fund is very important for having a successful auction, because an auction has to ultimately pay for the relocation costs. One of the challenges that I've seen, and it's really only been working through the process firsthand, is that there's maybe some bureaucracy in the process that may not be necessary, and maybe holding up our ability to auction bands as expeditiously as possible. So, like, for example, not only does the tech panel need to sign off on an agency's pipeline plan, which includes OMB, FCC, and NTIA, but then the OMB director then personally needs to sign off. There's a requirement of a 60-day congressional notification, so these are just things that kind of maybe are slowing down the process in a manner that doesn't necessarily advance the objective of making spectrum available expeditiously. And I think the most critical thing that we've recently seen as an obstacle is what's known as the SRF gap. So once the FCC, once spectrum is identified for the by the FCC for an auction, they have to notify NTIA 18 months before the auction, and so that they can pursue their pre-auction activities. The SRF funding cuts off, and that's statutorily, and so you can't run the processes simultaneously. The band studies get cut off once the FCC process starts, and so running them simultaneously might be a way to gain better efficiency and expedite our ability to auction, and that's so important because getting spectrum into the marketplace like 6 months sooner can be really critical in terms of our technology leadership as well as our economic leadership.
Well, sounds like NTIA's got some ideas for Congress on how to make that process a little simpler. They're good for you.
Yeah, it's always obviously defer to Congress. It's up to Congress. This is the law we have, and we will abide by it. But we always are, welcome the opportunity to share ideas on how to improve processes.
One of your focuses before you went to the NTIA, and certainly you've talked about it since, has been screen times in classrooms. I've got 2 kids. You've got a number of kids, more than 2, and it's interesting to see how technology has been implemented in our schools system, and I'm sure in yours. How does NTIA or the administration ensure that the ed tech prioritizes the technology that's being deployed? It's about learning and student well-being, not just engagement.
Great question, and one that's very near and dear to my heart, not only as a telecom policymaker, but also as a mother of 6 who's personally grappled with the challenge of my kids' technology use. And this has really become an across the administration effort. HHS recently released a regulatory toolkit and advisory on children's excessive screen time. NTIA launched an initiative actually at Free State Foundation last fall, announcing an initiative on kids' excessive screen time, and we held a really successful listening session, bringing together parents, teachers, and child development experts to discuss this challenge and also the levers at the disposal of federal policymakers, and what were the market trends and policies that were driving this phenomenon of children's screen use in schools. Something that really has become, technology use has risen in recent years, and it was especially, it seemed to especially become much more prevalent during COVID, and some of those trends have lingered. You see one-to-one device usage in many schools across the country, tablet usage as young as kindergarten, and I think it's gotten parents really, asking questions that, parents can only do so much to, restrict their children's technology use at home, and then, there's been, I think, a perception that maybe we've gone a little overboard, and we need to ensure that technology use in schools is done in a thoughtful way rather than an indiscriminate way. Maybe more isn't always better. And I think the research really bears that out recently. I've really, appreciated the research of neuroscientists like Jared Cooney-Horvath, who's really examined the impact of screen use on memory and on reading and critical thinking. So just really important issues. Really excited that yesterday Chairman Carr launched a review of the E-rate program to ensure that the program is operating ultimately in the interest of children. Something that I've tracked throughout my career, and it's just really critical. And he's really focused on, as the Trump administration is, on the issue of empowering parents. I think one of the challenges with any FCC programs or FCC rulemakings in general is that they attract lobbyists, consultants, regulatory counsel, and in this case, like the voices that we want to hear from are those who are directly affected by technology in schools, parents, teachers, children. They don't always have the right resources, the expertise. They don't have the regulatory counsel to go and lobby for their interests before the FCC. It's kind of like a classic public choice problem. And then so instead you have a scenario where the voices dominating the conversation are not necessarily the voices promoting the interests of children. They're promoting the interests of lobbyists, consultants, and companies. I think it's really important as the FCC pursues this important rulemaking to ensure that the right voices are at the table. One of, I think, the roles that NTIA can play is as a convener in bringing together the stakeholders, as we did at our listening session last year. So we're actually planning, a subsequent listening session that's really specifically focused on the FCC rulemaking, and ensure that those important stakeholders who we want at the table are able to share their voice and share their perspective so that we get to the right rules. Because it's one thing to ask the questions in the rulemaking. We also need to have a robust record. So what we're hoping to do is convene those important voices so that ultimately this rulemaking is successful. And just kudos to the FCC for looking at this issue. It's really important, not just as a matter of kids' screen time is obviously the critical focus, but also just as we look at the entire USF, so much has changed in the last several decades when it comes to technology. Now we have the BEAD program, so it's just very important to be looking at these programs to ensure that they're not distortionary, that they're in line with our American priorities for leading the world on technology innovation and protecting the interests of consumers and ratepayers.
Is that listening session, is that new? Is that something I wasn't aware of that?
Yeah, no, we're working on planning it right now.
Okay. Well, there we go. How about we switch topics a little bit? What can you share on Commerce Secretary Lutnick's deal with AT&T on FirstNet? Can we talk about FirstNet for a couple of minutes? And what do you expect in terms of the impact on public safety and oversight of FirstNet?
No, it's a great question. NTIA oversees the FirstNet Authority, the public safety broadband network. I think this was established in back in 2012. There has been a lot of interest in FirstNet, especially with the upcoming reauthorization of the program. Obviously, we share the view of public safety that it's critical for public safety to have reliable, ubiquitous connectivity in times of emergency. So ensuring that FirstNet maximizes benefits for public safety in terms of that reliability and ubiquitous connectivity, as well as takes advantage of technological evolution. The technology landscape has shifted so much over even the last few years, and we want to ensure that first responders are able to take advantage of that. There's been some challenges in recent years regarding the confusion over roles and the role of the FirstNet board and the role of NTIA and the role of the FirstNet Authority. I think that's something that the House really sought to address in their reauthorization efforts. And so, ensuring that, so just applaud the House for their work on the bill, and it really takes a thoughtful approach to ensuring that FirstNet is, that the lines of accountability are clear. And we've also been, very involved in oversight of FirstNet to ensure that to ensure that we're, doing our due diligence and review of task orders so that they really are effectuating the vision of the public safety community and the board. That really culminated in it was thanks to that oversight that we were able to provide recommendations to Secretary Lutnick, and he was able to negotiate an additional $2 billion in value for public safety in the contractual framework. And so, really excited about that. Ultimately, our goal is ensuring that FirstNet is delivering and continues to deliver maximum benefits for public safety, and ultimately that the program is a success. We think that the deal that Secretary Lutnick really delivers in that respect.
On a related public safety issue, NG 911, the NTIA just completed an analysis. It hasn't been done since, I think, 2018. And I'm interested to know, what did you find? And specifically, I was intrigued by one of the published points that the estimated cost of the transition to full NG 911 may have dropped by 50%.
Yeah, so on that topic, NTIA, as you know, there have been several proposals in Congress, a lot of interest on the topic of next generation 911 and ensuring that that 911 is reliable, and that when you call 911 that it works. And part of that is involves modernizing 911 systems. So the last time that the administration had done a study on the cost of nationwide NG 911 implementation, that was back in 2017, and a lot has changed since then. We've seen many states invest heavily in modernizing their 911 networks, and invest in NG 911 deployment. We've also seen a larger shift in the NG 911 industry from one of those kind of based on upfront deployment costs to more of a subscription-based model with larger recurring costs than the legacy system, but with fewer upfront costs. And so we provided a study. We released a study, I think it was last month, to really provide helpful information on this current state of the marketplace and on what we estimate an objective nationwide cost would be. We've seen a significant reduction from the previous study to now, and that we felt was helpful information to share with policymakers as well as Congress, because ultimately this wasn't about issuing policy recommendations, but really providing more information. That's where I think NTIA can really provide a helpful role, and so we've gotten great feedback on the report. I think that it's always helpful to share more data and more information.
Last policy issue. Let's turn back to Spectrum a little bit. One of NTIA's functions, as I remember, international communications policy. WRC 27, China. What do you anticipate being the sticking points for the administration going forward, and how is that process developing? How will the public be able to define success?
Thanks. It's a really, really important question. This administration is laser focused on ensuring that the U.S. leads internationally on standards and at WRC. This was even in the presidential memorandum on winning the race to 6G. It highlighted the importance of rallying our allies around U.S. positions and working strategically to advance our priorities in international fora. And so NTIA is working with our colleagues at State Department, FCC, and the White House to get our positions finalized early so that we can go in a strong position at WRC where we're leading and working successfully with our allies rather than following or letting our adversaries drive the conversation. We've finalized 5 American positions in advance of our previous regional meeting, CTEL. We're working to finalize the rest of them in advance of the next regional meeting that precedes WRC. So, that is, miles ahead of where we were the previous administration at this time in preparing for WRC. And that's really thanks to, as I alluded to before, the leadership of this administration and the prioritization of our 6G leadership. The agenda at WRC 27 is actually going to be very satellite heavy, and that's obviously an area where we lead, and we want to continue to advance our interests. One of the things that we recently did to promote U.S. positions related to commercial space is we held a training in Ghana with key African countries. It was focused on not only the importance and the benefits of granting market access to American satellite operators and the benefits that could bring their countries in terms of ubiquitous connectivity and economic development, but also on the importance of ensuring a healthy international regulatory environment for commercial space. There's been kind of a trend towards certain nations trying to establish what they call sovereignty over space and certain protectionist impulses to limit market access, reserve orbital planes, and generally, some countries consider these services to be have pursued regulations and positions that don't necessarily align with the interests of U.S. commercial space. And we were really successful, actually, in convincing key countries to side with U.S. positions on some of the key items going into WRC on commercial space. But certainly there's more work to be done. There's a really problematic agenda item being pushed by Iran. It's agenda item 1.5 that's focused on requiring satellite operators to turn off their transmissions or their terminals as their satellites are traveling over a country, which raises challenges with respect to not only just the cost of deploying global satellite systems, but also potentially public safety repercussions. And it's also not necessary for the ITU to be regulating in this area. And so that's definitely one item that we've really been tracking. At the same time, some of you may be aware, the European Commission recently issued a protectionist proposal on the 2 gigahertz MSS band to reserve spectrum for European operators, which is really inconsistent with our tradition of open, non-discriminatory access in the United States. We expect Europe to abide by those same principles, especially when the consequences of not doing that and promoting a protectionist agenda really means cutting off Europeans from really innovative services. In the proposal, there's a prohibition on the incumbents from transferring or subleasing their rights in the 2 years while the proceeding is pending. I think it's just, some of these protectionist approaches or something. We've seen real trends on this that the U.S. has, been very focused on pushing back on. There's, in addition to satellite items, we're obviously, closely watching, closely engaged on the identification of spectrum for 6G. China's obviously been pushing 6 gigahertz, and so working on finalizing our positions to put forth a strong alternative. That's agenda item 1.7. And then finally, one other thing I would just add is that we're also. I was in Geneva for an ITU Council meeting last month, and had several bilaterals with countries on many of these issues. In addition, we just need to make sure that leadership at the ITU is favorable to our ability to promote our strategic interests. Right now, we have 3 candidates running for ITU elections. That's Doreen Bogdan-Martin for the Secretary of the ITU, and Jennifer Warren for the Radio Regulations Board, and the U.S. is also seeking re-election for ITU Council. Having success in ITU leadership is really important to ensure a fair conference where we're able to pursue our interests without interference, especially given that the site of WRC 27 in Shanghai.
All right, last question, an easy one and quick. Are you enjoying your time at NTIA?
Yeah, 100%. It's a huge blessing. I get to work with amazing colleagues, very challenging but interesting issues, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to serve our president and our country.
Well, please thank Administrator Roth for her public service and sharing her comments. Thank you so very much.